The Banished Princess. The twin moons of the Drak-Zur Empire cast a cold silver glow over the desolate wasteland. The air was thick with dust, swirling in the chilly night breeze. Amidst the barren landscape, a lone figure stumbled forward, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Zira, the daughter of the mighty King Zaltor, had once lived in luxury, surrounded by towering palace walls and servants who obeyed her every command. But tonight, she was nothing more than an exile, a discarded burden left to perish in the wilderness. Her father's last words echoed in her mind. "You are no daughter of mine. The weak do not belong in my kingdom." Her heart clenched. She had always known she was different from the others of her kind. The Drak-Zuri were a warrior race, their strength unmatched, their bodies built for battle. But Zira had been born broken. Her legs were frail, her muscles weaker than those of her siblings. She could not fight like them, could not stand among the warriors her father so proudly led. And so he had cast her out, as was their tradition. She pressed a hand to her ribs, wincing at the sharp pain. The guards had not been gentle when they dragged her out of the palace gates. Every breath she took was a reminder of her humiliation. The wind howled through the wasteland, carrying distant growls of unseen creatures. Zira shivered. She had heard stories of the beasts that roamed this cursed land, massive, fanged predators that thrived in the darkness. She wasn't meant to survive the night. Her legs finally gave out, and she collapsed to her knees. Was this it? Was this how her story ended? Then, a strange sound broke the silence. A low hum, steady and mechanical, unlike anything she had ever heard before. She lifted her head, her tired eyes searching the sky. And then she saw it. A metallic ship, gliding through the night, its surface gleaming under the moon's light. The ship was unlike any Drak-Zuri craft. It was sleek, compact, and strangely elegant. Zira's breath hitched. She had heard whispers of travelers from beyond the stars, creatures called humans. Was this one of their ships? The vessel descended, kicking up a cloud of dust as it landed just a few feet away from her. A hatch hissed open, and a figure emerged. Zira's vision blurred, but she could make out his form, a tall, broad-shouldered being, clad in a strange, fitted suit. He moved cautiously, his boots crunching against the rocky ground as he approached. A human. Her people spoke of humans as a weaker species, fragile and insignificant in the grand scheme of the galaxy. Yet, as this one knelt before her, concern evident in his deep-set eyes, Zira saw no weakness in him. "Hey, can you hear me?" His voice was firm, yet gentle. Zira tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She barely managed to nod. He pulled a small device from his belt, scanning her with quick efficiency. His brows furrowed. "You're in bad shape. Internal injuries, dehydration, and you're freezing." He let out a sharp breath, running a hand through his short brown hair. "Why are you out here alone?" Zira hesitated. Could she trust him? Would he help her if he knew the truth? But she had no other choice. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Banished. Left to die." The human's expression darkened. Disgust. Anger. He muttered something under his breath, something Zira couldn't understand. "That's barbaric." She blinked. No one had ever reacted like that before. In her world, the weak were abandoned. It was the way of their people. But this human, he saw things differently. His gaze softened. He reached out, gently placing a warm, steady hand on her shoulder. "I'm not leaving you here." Her eyes widened. What? She had expected cruelty, indifference, perhaps even amusement at her suffering. But this human, a total stranger, was offering her something she had never known before. Kindness. Zira barely had the strength to resist as he scooped her up in his arms. He was stronger than he looked. The stories had been wrong. Humans weren't weak. The man carried her back to his ship, the warmth of his body keeping her from slipping into unconsciousness. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the soft, blinking lights of the ship's interior. And for the first time in her life, Zaira felt something new. Hope. A human's miracle. Zaira awoke to a strange sensation. Warmth. For as long as she could remember, her body had always been cold, fragile, weak. But now, a soothing heat wrapped around her, chasing away the bone-deep chill that had plagued her since birth. She blinked against the dim light overhead, her mind sluggish, her body feeling different. She wasn't in the wasteland anymore. Her eyes adjusted, and she found herself lying on a soft metallic surface, surrounded by unfamiliar machines. The air smelled of something oddly sterile, mixed with a faint foreign scent. Not unpleasant, but different. Zaira struggled to sit up, but a firm hand gently pressed her back down. "Easy there," a deep voice murmured. Her gaze snapped to the side, and she froze. The human. He stood beside her, his expression calm yet focused, eyes scanning a small device in his hand. His dark brown hair was slightly messy, his clothing fitted and practical, a strange blend of fabric and metal she had never seen before. Zaira's instincts screamed at her to be on guard. Humans were outsiders, weaklings, or at least that's what her people believed. But as she stared at him, she felt none of the disdain she had been taught. Instead, she felt confusion. He had saved her. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, her throat raw. The human glanced at her. "My ship. I found you out there, half dead." His ship. Zaira looked around again, taking in the smooth, curved walls lined with blinking lights. Strange tools rested on nearby counters, unlike anything she had ever seen. Everything about this place was so clean, advanced, efficient. Her kind believed humans were an inferior species, yet this vessel was more advanced than any Draxiri warship she had ever seen. Her gaze snapped back to him. "Why did you help me?" The human tilted his head slightly, as if the question itself was strange. "Because you needed it." Zaira frowned. "You don't even know me." He let out a dry chuckle. "So, does that mean I should have left you to die?" Zaira opened her mouth but found no answer. That was exactly what her own father had done. The human must have noticed her hesitation because his expression softened. "My name's Ethan," he said. "What's yours?" She hesitated, her pride warring with her survival instincts. But what did she have to lose? Her name meant nothing now. "Zaira." Ethan gave a small nod. "All right, Zaira. Here's the deal. I patched you up, but you're still recovering. You need rest." Zaira looked down at herself. That's when she noticed the changes. Her arms, once thin and weak, were now wrapped in strange metallic bands, sleek and pulsing with faint energy. Her legs, which had always struggled to support her, felt stronger, sturdier. Her breath hitched. "What did you do to me?" Ethan leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. "Fixed you." Her heart pounded. Fixed. For her entire life, she had been told she was broken, useless, unworthy, a disgrace. But this human, he had simply fixed her, as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. "I don't understand," she whispered. Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Your body was failing. You had internal injuries, nerve damage. I used some cybernetic implants to help. They'll take some getting used to, but trust me, they're better than what you had before." Cybernetic implants. Human technology. Zaira flexed her fingers, feeling the strength in them, a strength she had never possessed before. She should have been horrified. Her people saw modifications as unnatural, shameful. But as she clenched her fist, feeling power surge through her once weak limbs, she felt something she had never dared to dream of. Hope. A sudden thought struck her. "My father, he sent me away because I was weak. If he sees me like this..." Ethan's expression darkened. "Then he's an idiot." Zaira flinched. No one had ever spoken about the mighty King Zaltor that way before. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I don't care what your father thinks. Strength isn't just about muscles or weapons. It's about survival, intelligence, adaptability. And from what I see, you're still here. So that means you're stronger than he'll ever know. Zira's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said something like that to her before. A small, hesitant spark ignited in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this human was right. But before she could say anything, a sharp beeping sound echoed through the ship. Ethan's expression turned serious as he checked the screen. His jaw tightened. Damn it. We got company. Zira tensed. Who? Ethan's eyes met hers. Your people. And they're not here to rescue you. A cold chill ran down Zira's spine. Her father had sent hunters to finish what he started. And now, Ethan was in danger too. Because of her. She wouldn't let him die for her. Not after he had given her a second chance. Zira clenched her fists, feeling the power surge through her new limbs. For the first time in her life, she was ready to fight. The king's wrath. The ship shook violently, a loud explosion rattling its metal walls. Warning lights flashed red, alarms blaring through the control room. Ethan gritted his teeth, hands flying over the control panel. Damn it. They found us faster than I thought. Zira barely had time to process what was happening before another blast slammed against the ship's shields. Through the small viewport, she saw them. Sleek, black warships marked with the insignia of the Drak-Zur royal fleet. Her father had sent his hunters. They weren't here for negotiations. Zira's heart pounded. A week ago, she would have cowered in fear. A week ago, she would have accepted death. But now, with her new strength, with Ethan at her side, something inside her had changed. She wasn't weak anymore. She wasn't ready to die. Ethan flicked a switch, his voice sharp. Shields holding at 60%, but we can't take another direct hit. If we don't shake them soon, we're dead. Zira's hands curled into fists. Then let's fight. Ethan turned to her, raising an eyebrow. You know how to fly. She shook her head. No, but I know how they think. If you give me access to your systems, I can predict their attack patterns. Ethan hesitated for only a second before nodding. Fine. Sit down and don't touch anything unless I tell you to. Zira slid into the co-pilot's seat, her fingers brushing over the strange glowing controls. They were nothing like Drak-Zur warships. More intuitive, smoother, alive. Ethan jerked the controls, sending the ship into a sharp dive just as another plasma bolt streaked past them. The enemy ships adjusted instantly, moving in perfect synchronization. Zira's stomach twisted. They were closing in. Then something on the screen caught her eye. A pattern. Her people were strong warriors, but they fought in predictable formations. If she was right. There. A tiny window of opportunity. Now, turn 42 degrees left and cut the thrusters for exactly 2 seconds, she shouted. Ethan barely hesitated before following her command. The ship swerved sharply, dropping like a stone. The enemy ships, locked in formation, overshot their target. For a fraction of a second, they were exposed. Ethan's eyes flashed. Nice call. He slammed a button, and a hidden turret emerged from the hull. Bright blue plasma ripped through space, tearing into one of the enemy ships. The explosion lit up the darkness, sending the remaining fighters into chaos. Zira's breath hitched. They had just destroyed a royal warship. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running from her people. She was fighting back. But the battle wasn't over. A hollow, echoing voice suddenly crackled through the ship's speakers, deep and cruelly familiar. Zira. Her body went rigid. It was him, King Zaltor. His voice was calm, but beneath it lay a storm of fury. You dare to raise arms against your own people. You shame your bloodline. Zira swallowed hard. She could hear the disgust in his tone, the same tone he had used when he cast her away like garbage. But this time, she wasn't alone. Ethan muted the comms, turning to her with a scowl. Do you want to hear more of his crap, or do we get out of here? Zira's fingers tightened around the controls. A week ago, she would have let her father's words crush her. But now, with human hands repairing what her people had broken, she saw the truth. Her father had never given her a chance. But Ethan had. She looked at him, her decision clear. "Let's get out of here." Ethan grinned. "Thought you'd say that." With one last, sharp maneuver, their ship blasted into hyperspace, leaving the royal fleet behind. Zara didn't look back. For the first time in her life, she was free. The warrior reborn. Zara stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. For years, she had seen herself as weak, broken, unworthy, a discarded princess who had never been strong enough to fight. But the girl who stared back at her now, she was different. Her once thin arms were now lined with sleek cybernetic reinforcements, pulsing faintly with energy. Her legs, once fragile, prone to failure, now held power, strong enough to carry her without trembling. The scars of her past were still there, but now, they meant something different. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was something new. Behind her, Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her reaction. "Well, what do you think?" Zara flexed her fingers, feeling the smooth movement of the cybernetics. "It doesn't feel unnatural," she admitted. "It feels like me." Ethan grinned. "That's the point. I didn't replace what was broken. I just helped you become what you were meant to be." Her chest tightened. No one had ever said something like that to her before, but there was no time to dwell on it. The ship's alarms blared, snapping them both to attention. Ethan rushed to the controls. "They found us again. Already." Zara moved beside him, scanning the readings. Her father's fleet hadn't caught up yet, but something else had. A Draxiri bounty hunter ship. Her heart pounded. "They won't stop hunting me. Not until I'm dead." Ethan exhaled through his nose. "Then we need to make sure you can fight back." Zara looked at him, startled. "What?" He turned to her, eyes steady. "We can't keep running forever, Zara. Your father's forces are trained warriors. You need to be ready for them." A week ago, she would have refused. A week ago, she would have feared battle. But now, she looked at her hands again, felt the power thrumming through her cybernetics. She had been given a second chance. She wouldn't waste it. She nodded. "Train me." Ethan's lips quirked into a grin. "Thought you'd never ask." The training begins. The cargo bay of Ethan's ship had been cleared, transformed into a makeshift training area. Zara stood in the center, shifting on her feet, getting used to the new weight of her limbs. Ethan stood across from her, hands raised. "First lesson, your strength is different now. You have to learn how to control it." Zara frowned. "I thought I was supposed to get stronger." Ethan smirked. "Strength without control is just chaos. Watch." He tossed a small metal sphere at her. Instinctively, Zara caught it, but the moment her fingers clenched, the sphere crushed like paper. She stared at the ruined metal in her palm, stunned. Ethan chuckled. "Told you." She exhaled slowly. She wasn't just stronger. She was something else entirely, adapting to the new Zara. Over the next few hours, Ethan pushed her harder than anyone ever had before. Her new legs let her move faster than ever. She could leap across the training bay in a single bound. But that speed meant she had to be careful with every step, or she'd overshoot her target. Her cybernetic arms gave her strength beyond anything she had ever known, but every attack had to be measured, precise, or she'd destroy more than she intended. At first, she struggled. She stumbled. She miscalculated. But every time she failed, Ethan was there. Again. "Adjust your stance. Control your power. Don't let it control you." His voice was steady, never mocking, never cruel. For the first time in her life, someone was teaching her to use her strength instead of punishing her for lacking it. Hours passed. Her body ached, her muscles, both human and cybernetic, screamed for rest. But still, she pushed forward. She wasn't training to impress anyone. She was training to survive. The final test. Ethan stepped back, breathing slightly heavier now. All right, last test. He pressed a button, and a training drone emerged from the floor, sleek, armed, and fast. Defeat it without relying on brute strength alone. The drone lunged at her. Zira dodged to the side, faster than before. The drone adjusted, firing a stun blast. She deflected it with her cybernetic arm, redirecting the shot back toward it. The blast hit the drone's side, staggering it. Zira saw her opening and moved in, quick, controlled. A single precise strike to the core. The drone collapsed. Ethan whistled. Not bad. Zira exhaled slowly, her heart pounding, but not with fear, with exhilaration. She had won, not because she was the strongest, but because she had learned how to fight smart. Ethan walked up to her, clapping a hand on her shoulder. You're ready. Zira turned to him, determination burning in her veins. Then let's take back what's mine. Return of the Outcast. The twin moons of the Draxir homeworld loomed ahead, casting their cold glow over the darkened surface. The planet was just as Zira remembered, vast, unforgiving, and ruled by a man who had abandoned her. Only this time, she wasn't coming back as a disgraced exile. She was returning as something new. The cockpit of Ethan's ship was silent, the hum of the engines the only sound as they drifted in the outer atmosphere, cloaked from enemy detection. Ethan leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. All right, Princess, we're here. You sure about this? Zira's gaze stayed locked on the planet. Her father had cast her away, declared her unworthy of the royal blood in her veins. She had spent years believing him, but not anymore. I need to do this, she said. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Then tell me the plan one more time. Because breaking into a planet ruled by a guy who wants you dead, not exactly a walk in the park. Zira's lips twitched. I thought you liked a challenge. Ethan smirked. I like challenges that don't get me killed. She turned to him, her expression serious. My father is preparing for the grand tournament. It's the biggest event of the cycle. Warriors from across the empire fight to prove their worth. The entire royal court will be there. Ethan's brows raised. And you think that's your moment to prove yourself? Zira nodded. I challenge the kingdom's strongest warrior. If I win, I prove that I was never weak, that my exile was a mistake. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. And if you lose? Zira met his gaze, her cybernetic fingers curling into a fist. Then I die on my own terms. Breaking into the empire, getting past the outer defenses was easier than expected. The grand tournament meant that the military's focus was on guarding the arena, not the skies. Ethan's ship touched down just beyond the city's walls, hidden beneath the towering cliffs. The air was thick with the scent of metal and fire, the distant echoes of battle horns ringing in the distance. Zira pulled up the hood of her cloak, hiding her face. Even with her enhancements, she couldn't risk being recognized too soon. Ethan adjusted the strap on his belt, where his plasma pistol rested. I assume we're sneaking in. Zira smirked. Not exactly. She stepped forward, and before Ethan could question her, she pulled her hood down and walked straight into the open city gates. The guards turned toward her, eyes narrowing, then widening in shock. The exile. Zira's voice rang out, loud and unwavering. I challenged the strongest warrior of the kingdom. A stunned silence rippled through the gathered crowd. Then murmurs, gasps. Zira held her ground as the guards hesitated, uncertain. She knew their laws. A challenge spoken in public could not be denied, not even by the king himself. Then, from above the gates, a deep, booming voice cut through the noise. So the broken princess crawls back from the void. Zira looked up. Her father, King Zaltor, stood at the edge of the great balcony, his golden armor gleaming under the twin moons. His gaze was the same as she remembered, cold, calculating, unimpressed. You dare to challenge my warriors, he called down. You who could barely stand on your own 2 feet before I cast you out. Zira pulled off her cloak, revealing her enhanced body, the cybernetic limbs pulsing with energy. She raised her chin, letting the entire crowd see her transformation. You threw me away because I was weak. But I am not weak anymore. The king's eyes narrowed. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Very well. You want to fight. The crowd parted as a towering figure stepped forward. A warrior clad in obsidian black armor, his 4 arms flexing, each one holding a different weapon. The champion of the grand tournament. The undefeated warrior of the empire. Zyra's opponent. The crowd roared as the king raised a hand. Then fight. Ethan, standing behind Zira, muttered, "Yeah, this is a terrible idea." Zira ignored him. She stepped forward, her heart pounding, her fingers twitching at her sides. This was it, the fight of her life. No more running, no more exile. She was going to show them all what a broken princess could really do. The battle for honor. The arena was alive with the deafening roar of the crowd, their chants echoing across the towering stone walls. The grand tournament was the pinnacle of Draxxur culture, a brutal, unforgiving battle where warriors proved their strength or died trying. Tonight, the entire kingdom had gathered to witness an unexpected challenger. Zyra, the banished princess, the one they had called weak, broken, unworthy of her royal blood. She stood at the center of the massive Colosseum, her pulse steady, her breath controlled. The twin moons overhead cast a silver glow on the black sand beneath her feet. Across from her, her opponent towered like a mountain, the reigning champion of the grand tournament. Krex the Executioner, a 4-armed behemoth, standing nearly twice her height. His body was covered in thick, jagged armor, his 4 weapons gleaming under the light, a plasma axe, a war spear, an energy shield, and a long curved blade. The Draxxuri warriors watching from the stands jeered and laughed, certain of Zyra's doom. She won't last 5 seconds, a disgrace to our bloodline. The king should have ended her himself. Zyra ignored them. Her eyes locked onto the royal balcony, where her father, King Zaltor, sat on his golden throne, watching her with the same cold indifference he had the day he exiled her. This fight wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving something to him. It was about proving something to herself. Ethan stood at the edge of the combat pit, arms crossed, his expression grim. He had spent weeks training her, helping her master the strength her people had once denied her. Now she was about to test it. A deep horn bellowed through the arena. The battle had begun. The fight begins. Krex didn't hesitate. He charged like a war beast, all 4 weapons whirling in a storm of deadly precision. Zyra moved. Faster than anyone expected. Her cybernetic legs launched her sideways, avoiding the brutal swing of the plasma axe. Krex was strong, monstrously strong, but he was predictable. He fought like every other Draxxuri warrior. Brute force, raw aggression. Zyra. She had learned something else. She dodged, weaved, and countered, her new strength allowing her to move like liquid shadow. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just trying to survive. She was controlling the fight. Krex snarled in frustration, switching tactics. His spear lashed out. Faster than before, the tip aimed at her midsection. Zyra reacted on instinct. Her cybernetic arm snapped up, catching the spear's shaft midair. Gasps echoed through the arena. Krex tried to pull it back, but he couldn't. Zyra held firm. For the first time, she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. She ripped the spear from his grasp and drove it into the ground behind her. Krex roared, his remaining weapon swinging. His curved blade came down, too fast to dodge. Zyra raised her cybernetic arm. The blade clashed against reinforced metal, sparks flying. But the blade didn't pierce her. Her arm held. Krex's eyes widened in shock. Zyra smiled, surprised. Then she struck. A single, precise punch, not wild, not reckless. She didn't need brute force. She had calculated strength. Her fist slammed into Krex's chest plate, and the shockwave sent him flying across the arena. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Krex staggered to his feet, dazed. His chest plate was cracked. He had underestimated her. They all had. But Zira wasn't done yet. She charged, not as a weakling, not as an outcast, but as a warrior. Krex swung his axe again, but this time, Zira sidestepped effortlessly, twisting midair and delivering a devastating kick to his knee. The impact shattered his balance, forcing him onto one knee. For the first time, Krex the Executioner knelt before another. The arena erupted into chaos. Gasps, shouts, disbelief. Even King Zaltor sat forward in his throne, his eyes narrowing. Ethan, watching from the sidelines, let out a low whistle. Dan, she actually did it. The final strike. Krex roared in defiance, rising again, his shield raised. I won't be defeated by an exile. Zira's gaze remained steady. Then stay down. She launched herself forward. One final attack. Not with rage. Not with hatred. With precision. She slipped past his shield, pivoted behind him, and delivered a controlled strike to the back of his head. The impact sent a shockwave through his nervous system. Krex's massive form stumbled, then collapsed. The champion of the grand tournament lay motionless in the sand. Silence. Then, roars. For the first time in history, an exiled warrior had returned and won. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or riot. Some shouted her name in stunned disbelief. Others screamed that it was dishonor, an insult to their traditions. But the laws were clear. Zira had won. She turned toward the royal balcony, her chest rising and falling. King Zaltor stood, his face unreadable. You are no longer weak, he said, his voice carrying over the noise. But that does not make you worthy. Zira clenched her fists. Even now, he refused to acknowledge her. Even after everything, he would never see her as more than a mistake. But she had expected that. She wasn't fighting for him. She had already won the battle that mattered, the one within herself. Zira turned, walking away from the arena. The grand tournament was over. But her story was just beginning. A new destiny. The grand arena still echoed with the chaos of what had just happened. Zira had done the impossible. She had defeated the champion of the Draxiri Empire, a warrior who had never known defeat. She should have felt victorious. But as she stood in the center of the arena, staring up at the cold, unreadable expression of her father, King Zaltor, she realized something. No victory would ever be enough for him. Even now, after proving her strength, he did not see her as worthy. The king stepped forward on the royal balcony, his golden armor catching the moonlight. His voice rang out across the stunned crowd. You fought well. You are strong. But you are no daughter of mine. A hushed silence fell over the arena. The words struck harder than any blow Zira had taken in battle. Not because they hurt, she had expected them, but because, for the first time, they didn't matter. She met her father's gaze, her cybernetic fingers curling into fists. The old Zira, the one who had once begged for his approval, would have broken under his rejection. But that Zira was gone. Ethan, standing at the edge of the arena, watched closely. He had seen this kind of thing before, powerful men clinging to outdated beliefs, unable to see past their own pride. He knew what Zira had just realized. And when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, strong, and unwavering. I don't need your approval. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Zira took a step forward, her cybernetic limbs gleaming in the moonlight, her posture unshaken. You cast me out because I was weak, but a human taught me something you never did. Her father narrowed his eyes. And what is that? Zira lifted her chin. That true strength isn't just about power. It's about resilience. It's about choosing to stand up, no matter how many times you're knocked down. She gestured toward the defeated champion still lying in the sand. Your strongest warrior fell today because he only knew brute force. But I survived because I adapted. I changed. And that's why I will always be stronger than you. The crowd erupted. Some roared in support. Others spat in rage. But it didn't matter anymore. Zara turned her back on the throne. Her father had made his decision years ago. And now, so had she, leaving the empire behind. As she stepped out of the arena, Ethan fell into step beside her. So, that was intense. Zara let out a breath, her muscles still burning from the fight. Yeah. Ethan glanced at her. You okay? Zara wasn't sure how to answer. She had spent her entire life chasing a place in this kingdom, fighting to prove she belonged. And now, she had let it go. She didn't feel lost. She felt free. They reached Ethan's ship, its metal frame gleaming under the twin moons. Zara looked at it, then at the city one last time. She would never return here. But that didn't scare her anymore. Ethan leaned against the hull. So, what now? You proved your point. Your old man's still a jerk. You could stay, maybe start a rebellion or something. Zara smirked. Tempting. But no, I'm done fighting for people who don't want me. She turned to Ethan, her gaze steady. Let's go. Somewhere new. Somewhere I can decide who I want to be. Ethan grinned, pushing off the ship. Now that's what I like to hear. The engines roared to life, dust swirling around them as they climbed the ramp. As the ship lifted off, Zara took one final look at the planet below. She was no longer Zara, the broken princess. No longer an exile, begging for a place to belong. She was Zara, warrior of her own destiny. And for the first time in her life, the universe was hers to explore.